Your brain is not real, the receiver theory. The heart monitor flatlined at 2:17 p.m. Nurses froze. 30 seconds later, compression started. 7 minutes after that, he came back. In recovery, he described a shoe on the third-floor ledge, blue, untied, scuffed toe, outside the room. He'd never been up there. He also repeated a joke the anesthesiologist whispered while the room thought he was gone. Some claim consciousness dies with the brain. Others say the brain tunes it. If the brain's a receiver, identity, death, and free will all get rewritten. One detail from that shoe story will matter later. To understand why the monitor meant less than the memory, we have to rewind. The question that won't die. Consciousness feels obvious from the inside and impossible from the outside. There's the hard problem. How do electrical spikes and chemistry turn into the raw feel of being you? Colors, pain, the taste of oranges, the fact you're aware. Scan a brain and you'll see correlations. More of this rhythm, less of that network, a specific region firing before a report. But correlation isn't causation, and that gap keeps nagging. The generator model says neurons, organized just right, produce experience. It's the mainstream view in neuroscience. Arrange billions of cells into networks, wire them through development and learning, and subjective awareness emerges as a property of that physical process. We've mapped patterns tied to sleep, anesthesia, psychedelics, seizures. We can even nudge mood and perception with electricity or drugs. The model's strength is its toolbox. Manipulate the machine, change the mind. But it struggles in a few places. First, the explanatory bridge. Showing neural activity that tracks a feeling doesn't explain why any of it feels like anything. Second, edge cases. Shattered brains with intact minds. Sudden clarity before death. Experiences during apparent cortical silence. Third, the stubborn privacy of experience itself. You can read out signals, but the what it's like keeps slipping the net. Enter the receiver hypothesis. In this view, the brain is less a generator and more an interface. An adaptive decoder that tunes and filters a larger field or substrate of experience. Think of a radio. Twist the dial, channels appear, content flows, but the music isn't in the radio. Damage the receiver and the signal distorts. Improve the antenna and reception widens. This is not a religious claim, it's a frame. It asks whether the brain's primary job is selecting, shaping, and reporting experience, rather than manufacturing it from scratch. Why would any scientist entertain this? Because certain data points line up more neatly if you allow for tuning. Because information theory lets us compare integration and bandwidth without asserting origin. Because biology already uses fields and resonance to coordinate activity. And because a few predictions made by interface thinking differ from generator thinking in ways we can test. The stakes are not academic. Medicine decides who's conscious, who feels pain, who gets anesthesia or end-of-life sedation. Law weighs agency and responsibility. AI ethics wrestles with whether a system can suffer. If we misread the frame, if we call a dark screen no signal when the power cord's loose, people get hurt. Let's get concrete and pick 3 anchor perspectives. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff propose ORCH, or an attempt to ground moments of awareness in objective quantum state reductions linked to microtubules. It's ambitious, heavily criticized, and still evolving with hints from quantum biology. Giulio Tononi's integrated information theory says consciousness is what it feels like to be a system with a particular causal structure. Measure that phi, and you estimate the level of experience. It doesn't say where experience comes from, but it quantifies the capacity. Donald Hoffman argues that evolution optimizes fitness, not truth. Perception is a user interface with icons, not reality. And consciousness might be fundamental, while the brain is an app that organizes access. These maps overlap and clash. ORCH leans toward a physical substrate that could in principle host delicate tuning events. IIT gives us a dial, how integrated the system is, without claiming the dial invents music. Hoffman gives the metaphor, you never see the motherboard, you click the desktop. None of these alone equals the brain is a receiver, but together they make room for the question. Here's the duel that makes the debate testable. The generator expects that when you fully shut down the networks that allegedly create experience, deep anesthesia, flat EEG during cardiac arrest, there should be no structured experience at that time. Any memories reported later should be confabulations stitched from before and after, warped by stress and time compression. The receiver expects that if reception can briefly persist or reattach, you might see precise veridical perception outside normal sensory channels during windows that look offline. It also expects that altering the tuning with drugs, fields, or stimulation changes states quickly while leaving deep content latent, ready to reappear when the dial resets. We also need to address why correlation isn't enough. Imagine a pianist and a piano. The keys correlate with music. Damage certain strings and certain notes vanish. Add a pedal and the tone shifts. None of that tells you the pianist originated in the strings. You can still be wrong about where the music lives even while mastering the instrument. There's a risk of overreach both ways. Dismissing anomalous cases as noise avoids the hard questions. Turning every strange story into proof invites fantasy. So we'll keep our boundaries tight. When research is solid, we'll say so. When it's disputed, we'll flag it. When it's speculative, we'll label it. Remember the shoe from the cold open, the scuffed toe, the floor nobody visited? One detail about its placement and the timing of the joke will circle back. For now, set a simple rule as we move forward. Where the brain goes dark, the generator predicts silence. The receiver allows for reception glitches, late writes, or parallel access. To see which frame holds, we need to watch the brain fail while the mind keeps talking. Brain's offline, mind's online. Start with anesthesia, because it's supposed to be the clean shutdown. You measure depth, deliver the dose, watch the monitors, and trust the numbers. In some cases, they repeat sentences whispered behind masks. Yet anesthesiologists trade stories about connected consciousness. Patients with no movement, no response, later recalling fragments that match events in the room. Monitors showed adequate depth, bispectral indices looked fine. If the generator is off, there shouldn't be any tape running to write on. But the memory shows up like a postcard stamped during a blackout. Now drop into cardiac arrest, where the cortex should be quieter than any operating room. Oxygen collapses, EEG goes flat or near flat within seconds, and the window for structured experience is supposed to be closed. Yet a fraction of resuscitated patients report crisp, ordered scenes. The color of a crash cart drawer, the exact placement of a defibrillator pad, the rhythm the team counted. They also sometimes describe vantage points outside their body, noticing details behind them or on high shelves. If those details can be verified and time-locked, that matters. That's why protocols like AWARE tried to pin it down. Hospitals placed hidden visual targets high above eye level, only visible from near the ceiling. The team recorded timestamps for cardiac arrest, CPR, and return of circulation, and interviewed survivors with structured methods. The results were mixed. Most people had no recall. Some described themes that fit common near-death narratives. A tiny number offered specific perceptions. A smaller number had events that lined up with medical records. Very few had a clear shot at the hidden targets, which makes the data thin. Critics say the hit rate is too low and the design leaves room for contamination. But 2 points keep the receiver idea in play. First, the timing. In a handful of cases, reports line up with windows when cortical activity should have been minimal. Second, the content. Veridical details, like a machine making a tone during compressions or a comment spoken behind a curtain, were sometimes confirmed independently by staff who didn't expect the patient to remember anything. Generator defenders answer with residual activity and time distortion. Experience could form during early hypoxia or on the way back, didn't feel like it happened during the void. That's possible. Hypoxia can spike patterns briefly, and memory is slippery on the edge of life. So what would count as stronger evidence? Tight timestamps, independent witnesses, and details that can't be guessed. That's why the shoe in our opening matters. The placement wasn't visible from the bed or the doorway. The scuffed toe faced the wrong direction to be seen in normal care. The joke's timing, whispered during a lull when the monitor said no one's home, gives you a narrow window. If both line up under verification, the receiver frame doesn't win, but it doesn't lose by default either. Meanwhile, anesthesia awareness forces us to separate unconsciousness from unresponsiveness. There's a difference between not moving and not experiencing. Advanced monitoring sometimes shows islands of connectivity, networks flicker, and a person later reports hearing their name or feeling pressure, even when pain pathways were supposedly blocked. Some labs now look for connected consciousness signatures, trying to predict when someone is still in there despite flat behavior. If a state flip can occur quickly with drugs and reverse just as fast, yet memories reattach as if a continuous thread existed, that feels more like tuning than generating a new
feed each time. Alternative explanations deserve full weight. Confabulation stitches plausible scenes from scraps.
Time compression can squeeze minutes into a felt instant. Residual activity could carry enough structure to imprint impressions. Stress hormones might boost consolidation during the rebound. All of that can account for many reports. But it doesn't easily explain highly specific, independently corroborated perceptions that occur during documented physiological low points, especially when those perceptions require an odd vantage. The receiver hypothesis doesn't need spooky channels to get traction here. It can be modest. The brain maintains a minimal, non-localizable capacity to bind or later access information streams during physiological disruption, then writes them down on reconnection. That's still wild, but it's a smaller claim than souls floating above gurneys. It also makes a prediction. State-altering interventions should change the probability of such access without needing intact sensory pathways. Increase entropy, shift integration, and you might get more off-angle perceptions. Increase suppression uniformly, and they should drop. The impact is practical. In operating rooms, it's not enough to watch the dial. You need markers of connectedness. In cardiac arrest, protocols that combine audio logs, synchronized clocks, and concealed targets become more valuable because they separate mythology from data. For families, terminal moments of clarity, lucidity that cuts through months of fog, move from oddities to clues about access when the usual filters loosen. Every time we find minds online when brains read offline, the receiver frame gains a foothold where the generator predicted a void. If reception is real, even in a thin, glitchy way, something carries the signal. Where does that live? And how could a warm, wet brain possibly tune to it? We head next to the place that people love to invoke and love to dismiss: the quantum hints hiding in biology. Quantum hints, or red herrings. Quantum enters the chat with a warning label. It's where sloppy metaphors go to die. Still, some researchers think the only way to get moments of unified experience is to look below neurons, into the scaffolding that holds them up. Microtubules. Roger Penrose, a physicist chasing the limits of computation, and Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist staring at consciousness every day, teamed up on OR, orchestrated objective reduction. The claim is bold. Tiny proteins called tubulins inside microtubules can support quantum states that entangle across scales. When those states hit a gravity-related threshold, they collapse, an objective reduction, and that collapse is a discrete moment of experience. Orchestrate lots of them in coherent patterns, and you get the flow we call a mind. Here's the immediate pushback. Quantum coherence hates heat and noise. A warm, wet brain is heat and noise. Critics ran the numbers and argued that any delicate quantum state in a neuron would decohere in femtoseconds, far too fast to matter for cognition. That seemed like checkmate for years. If you can't keep coherence long enough, you can't build anything on it, let alone a receiver that tunes subtle signals. But biology keeps finding ways to play with quantum effects in messy conditions. Photosynthetic complexes move energy with near-perfect efficiency that looks like it uses quantum coherence, wave-like exploration to find the best path. European robins appear to sense Earth's magnetic field through a radical pair mechanism in cryptochrome proteins, where quantum spin states influence chemical reactions tied to direction. These aren't brains, but they're warm, wet, and alive, and they seem to stabilize quantum behavior long enough to do useful work. Meanwhile, microtubules turned out to be more than struts. Evidence suggests they have vibrational modes, resonances in the kilohertz to megahertz, even terahertz ranges, created by the way tubulins pack and flex. Some labs report that anesthetics bind to pockets on tubulin and change these vibrational properties, correlating with loss of consciousness. If that's right, anesthesia may disrupt not only synaptic chatter, but deeper oscillations that organize how information integrates. Now we're in interesting territory. If microtubules can sustain structured vibrations that couple across a cell, maybe coherence is not a fragile snowflake, but a robust, error-corrected choir. Still, we need to separate what's verified from what's speculative. Verified, microtubules exist everywhere in neurons, organize intracellular traffic, and show measurable vibrational behavior. Verified, some anesthetics bind to tubulin and change protein dynamics. Verified, quantum effects show up in other biological systems at non-cryogenic temperatures. Speculative, that microtubule vibrations maintain long-lived quantum coherence on cognitive timescales. Speculative, that objective reduction events tied to gravity thresholds. Map to conscious moments. The math behind OR is debated. The timescales and energy estimates are under fire. Critics argue classical explanations, ionic currents, network-level synchrony, fit the data without quantum leaps. So why not drop quantum entirely? Because the receiver hypothesis needs a plausible bandwidth and a mechanism to couple information to matter without inventing magic. If microtubules provide a dense, fractal-like lattice with tunable resonances, they could be the antenna array inside each neuron. If coherent modes exist even for microseconds, repeated and nested across billions of sites, you could layer them into mesoscopic rhythms that neurons already use, gamma, beta, theta, bridging quantum scales to network dynamics. That would allow small, precise influences to steer large-scale patterns, like tapping a tuning fork that nudges a whole orchestra into phase. There's a human angle here. Anesthesiologists have long noticed that different agents knock people out in different ways, and the relationship between receptor binding and loss of consciousness isn't linear. Some agents with weak effects on synapses still silence awareness reliably. If changing protein-level dynamics, especially in structures as ubiquitous as microtubules, alters consciousness more directly, then turning the dial might happen below the synapse. That dovetails with receiver thinking. You're not destroying the source, you're detuning the transducer. What nobody knew at the time of the earliest Orchard debates was how rich microtubule spectra might be. Terahertz spectroscopy and computational models point to bands of vibrational activity that could, in principle, couple to electromagnetic fields or to each other across cytoskeletal networks. If that's real, reception bandwidth isn't fantasy, it's a parameter. Of course, coupling is the key word. Without strong, biologically relevant coupling to neural firing and behavior, vibrations are just background hum. The fairest reading is this: quantum hints are suggestive, not decisive. They expand the menu of possible mechanisms for how a brain could tune or gate information beyond classic synaptic computation. They don't prove a non-local signal, but they make it less absurd to ask how a signal could ride along, and they give us testable footholds. If anesthetics change microtubule resonances, we should see consistent shifts in terahertz signatures when people lose and regain consciousness. If microtubule coherence matters, cooling brain tissue slightly or modulating specific frequency bands should alter conscious state disproportionately, even when synaptic activity stays similar. There's a trap to avoid. Quantum can become a rhetorical shield for confusion. We don't need it to explain all of consciousness, and it may end up being a red herring. But the edges of awareness, the sudden flips, the disproportionate effects of small interventions, the strange coupling across distance and neural tissue, invite us to at least check whether biology exploits physics more deeply than our textbooks assume. Quantum whispers aside, information still needs a language. Even if microtubules can sing, we need to know how the song becomes experience and how much song a system needs before anything is felt. That takes us from substrate to structure, from possible bandwidth to the measure of how tightly a system binds information together. In other words, integration. The score of consciousness in IIT. If quantum whispers are the instruments, integrated information theory is the score. IIT starts with a blunt claim. Consciousness is what it's like to be a system whose parts cause and constrain each other in a specific, irreducible way. It's not about inputs and outputs, it's about the internal causal web. The more the system's present state makes a difference to itself, both to its potential past and future, the richer the experience. That richness gets a number, phi. Here's the move that makes it powerful. Instead of hunting for a soul or a special molecule, IIT asks a structural question. Take any system, break it into all possible partitions. If you can split it without losing causal power, it's more like a collection than a whole. If splitting destroys its ability to determine its own states, it's integrated. High integration means the system forms a single it, a candidate for a unified point of view. In principle, you can compute this for simple networks. In practice, for a brain, it's hard. But you can approximate. Why should we care? Because phi tracks things we already measure. Under deep anesthesia and dreamless sleep, integration drops. During wakefulness and certain vivid dreams, it rises. Perturb the cortex with a magnetic pulse and watch the echo, the perturbational complexity index. And you get a readout that distinguishes conscious from unconscious states better than behavior does. A person can be unresponsive and still show a complex echo, suggesting there's someone present
behind the quiet exterior. That's a big deal in ICUs and during surgery. IIT also helps separate how much from what. The amount of integration relates to level, dim to bright, but the structure of causal relationships shapes content. Think of it as the shape of the score, not just loudness, but the pattern. Two systems might have similar phi, but very different internal structures, leading to different experiences. That matters for our receiver frame. If consciousness depends on integration, then building or preserving the right kind of causal structure is like building a better antenna. more capacity to bind signals into a single, coherent field we can inhabit. There's a tension people feel the second they hear the punchline. If any integrated system has some phi, does that mean your thermostat is a little bit conscious? That's the panpsychism creep accusation. IIT's answer is that most simple systems have negligible phi. Only special structures form rich maximal complexes. Still, critics argue the theory risks attributing experience too widely and relies on black box approximations in humans because calculating true phi is intractable for big brains. There's also a deep debate about whether the math uniquely identifies a conscious structure or just correlates with it. Let's ground this with faces and names. Patients with disorders of consciousness, minimally conscious states, locked-in syndrome, sometimes score awake on integration measures when bedside exams say asleep. Families have sat for months with a quiet face and still eyes, only to find, through EEG-based complexity or fMRI command following, that their person is in there. The refrigerator hum of hospital life fades for a moment. The room shifts. In those cases, integration gives a voice to those who can't move their lips. For a clinician, it's a new stethoscope for the mind. Now pull the receiver thread through IIT. If the brain's job is to integrate and decode, then phi is the dial for bandwidth. More integrated structures can maintain a single, unified field. Better reception. Less integrated structures fragment. Snow on the screen. This doesn't assert where the content originates. It quantifies the system's capacity to hold it together. You can see why OR fans and interface theorists eye IIT as a neutral arbiter of how much experience can be present, even if they disagree about why it's present at all. Here's the dual setup. A classic generator view expects a tight mapping. Nail down synaptic activity and you fix both level and content. IIT says level depends on integrated causal structure, which can in principle change without big shifts in simple firing rates. So in anesthesia, you might see similar overall activity, but a collapse in integration. Level drops while content machinery still idles. Under psychedelics, the rebus picture hints at relaxed priors and increased entropy. IIT predicts a reconfiguration of integration patterns, which should show up as changes in complexity and network cause-effect structure. Both sides can make predictions. They diverge in what they think matters most. We need tests. Push a brain with targeted stimulation and measure perturbational complexity before and after state flips. Compare agents that primarily dampen spikes with those suspected to alter subcellular dynamics. Ask whether integration falls differently. Track minimal behavior patients longitudinally. Do microsurges in 5-foreshadow lucidity? And crucially, can non-invasive measures of integration predict connected consciousness better than depth monitors in the OR? There's a philosophical unease to address. IIT's formalism builds a bridge between structure and experience, but the bridge might not cross the explanatory gap. It could be a beautifully engineered correlation. That's fine for our purposes. The receiver model can ride IIT as an instrument panel. It gives us a way to read the state of the set. How tuned, how unified, without pretending the meter creates the broadcast. While integration measures how much, perception may be lying about what. Evolution didn't optimize for truth, it optimized for survival. If our interface edits reality, then a hi-fi system could still be showing us icons, not the motherboard. That takes us to a different lens, one that treats perception as a desktop and the brain as an app.
Reality is an interface. Hoffman. Evolution doesn't hand out medals for seeing the truth. It rewards strategies that keep you alive long enough to reproduce. That's Donald Hoffman's starting point. He and his collaborators ran evolutionary game theory models where organisms compete using different perceptual strategies. Agents that tracked truth about the world lost to agents that tracked fitness payoffs mapped to survival and resources. In plain terms, accuracy is expensive. Useful icons are cheap and fast. If that's right, then what we see, space, time, objects with colors and edges, might be a convenient interface, not the underlying reality. Hoffman's metaphor lands cleanly because we use it every day. On your desktop, a blue folder icon doesn't reveal the voltages in your laptop. It's a compact symbol you can click without melting your brain with microchip schematics. The icon hides the truth so you can act. By that logic, our perceptions are icons built by evolution. The redness of an apple isn't the apple, it's an interface label that says edible energy here.
The brain then behaves like an app that reads and writes to this desktop, arranging icons, opening windows, closing others, all to keep the organism in the game. Evidence piles up from illusions and predictive coding. In the hollow mask illusion, you see a convex face where a concave mask spins. The visual system refuses to render a face as hollow because in your lived world, faces aren't. Your brain's priors beat the sensory data. That's predictive processing in action. The cortex constantly guesses what's out there and updates those guesses using error signals. We don't passively receive reality. We actively generate best guesses that serve behavior. What we call seeing is more like controlled hallucination pinned down by sensory input. Now tie this to the receiver idea. If perception is an interface tuned for fitness, not truth, then the brain's job is less about building reality from scratch and more about tuning to a useful channel and stabilizing icons. The content you experience could be a negotiated display sourced from a deeper information structure. Change the tuning by altering priors, relaxing constraints, or adding noise, and the icons morph, but the underlying data might still be there, waiting to be rendered differently. The stakes rise when you look at how easy it is to edit experience. Color constancy keeps a shirt blue across lighting changes, because your system rebalances assumptions about illumination. The dress that split the internet, blue, black, or white gold, exposed that different priors, not different eyes, create different worlds. In attentional blink, you miss a second target, flash moments after the first, because your interface locks onto one update at a time. In change blindness, a door passes between you and a stranger, and you fail to notice the person swaps. Your brain didn't update the icon because it didn't expect the change. The interface is optimized for efficiency, not completeness. Critics push on testability. Hoffman extends his interface idea into a formal conscious agent model, a network of interacting agents whose experiences and actions form a mathematically defined space. Skeptics say the framework is elegant but detached. Where are the predictions that beat standard neuroscience? Some tests exist at the edge. For instance, if perception is tuned by fitness, not truth, organisms should systematically misperceive when misperception offers a payoff. Behavioral ecologists find exactly that. Beetles mating with beer bottles because the reflected spectrum matches a supernormal cue. For humans, predictive coding models can forecast when hallucinations will occur under degraded input or heightened priors. The results align with psychedelic and psychosis data. Here's where it gets practical. If perception is a dial, you can turn it. Psychedelics like psilocybin lower the precision of high-level priors. Rebus calls it relaxed beliefs under psychedelics. The brain leans less on top-down predictions and more on bottom-up signals. Subjectively, that feels like the interface loosening. Boundaries dissolve, colors intensify, auditory patterns feel meaningful. From a receiver frame, you haven't created new reality. You've changed how the app renders the icons, potentially letting in content normally filtered out. Now tease a lab task that acts like a tuning knob. Take binocular rivalry. Present one image to the left eye and another to the right, and perception flips between them. With subtle electrical stimulation or pharmacological tweaks, you can shift the dominance duration, effectively nudging which icon the interface favors. That's a measurable dial. Another, use auditory streaming, where tones group into one stream or split into two, based on frequency and timing. By altering neuromodulators like acetylcholine, you can bias the grouping, revealing that the what you hear depends on system state.
Not just input. Receiver logic tightens here. If the brain is an app arranging icons on a fitness-optimized desktop, then tuning state should change the layout without needing new external data. That's what we see. The same stimulus leads to different experiences under different priors and neuromodulatory settings. Meanwhile, the deep content, the file behind the icon, can persist across state flips, which matches patients who regain baseline perceptions when the dial resets. You didn't lose reality. You just hid it behind a different icon set for a while. There are boundaries. Hoffman's stronger claim that consciousness is fundamental and space-time is emergent is provocative, not settled. The math of conscious agents connects to Markov blankets and Bayesian networks in ways that are suggestive but not decisive. Still, the interface piece stands on solid ground. Perception is selective, constructed, and tuned for action. That's enough for our storyline. If we live behind a desktop, a receiver is the right kind of device to use it. So if perception is tuned, can we change the channel chemically or electrically? We already are. Next, we'll twist the dial on purpose, with psychedelics, fields, and wires, and watch the interface reskin in real time. Tuning the dial, psychedelics, fields, and wires. We don't need metaphors to see the dial move. We can push it. Start with psychedelics. Under psilocybin or LSD, the brain's default mode network, the midline hub that stitches a tidy self, loosens. Rebus calls it relaxed beliefs under psychedelics. Top-down predictions lose precision. Bottom-up signals gain influence. On fMRI and MEG, network segregation fades and long-range communication becomes more global. Subjectively, identity stretches, edges blur, and latent memories flood in with a sense of novelty. Then the drug clears, the default mode tightens, and the familiar self returns, as if you changed the rendering engine, not the file system. What's striking is the speed. In minutes, the me reorganizes. Under the receiver lens, priors behave like tuning presets. Turn them down, and the interface shows more raw signal, richer, noisier, often more meaningful to the person. Turn them back up, and the icons snap into their old positions. Therapists see this in session. A rigid narrative softens during the window, and insights land with force. Weeks later, the person reports living differently, but their baseline perception of the room, the color of the couch, the layout of the world, those icons reassemble. Content persists beneath state flips. Chemistry isn't the only dial. Magnetic and electrical tools let us nudge state without adding molecules. Transcranial magnetic stimulation fires a focused magnetic pulse that kicks cortical tissue. Depending on where and how you pulse, you can transiently silence, excite, or perturb networks. TDCS slides a small current across the scalp and biases neuron thresholds. TAX adds oscillation, entraining rhythms like setting a metronome near a drummer. Focused ultrasound reaches deeper, modulating activity with millimeter precision. These methods can alter mood, attention, pain, and even induce phosphenes, flickers of light with eyes closed without touching photoreceptors. The interface edits itself when you lean on the right nodes. In sleep labs and operating rooms, state flips show up as distinct signatures. The perturbational complexity index drops when consciousness wanes. Yet content knowledge is often absent. Stimulate here, and the subject says, "I feel something," but they can't tell you what. That gap, state without content, fits a receiver-decoder split. You can change the carrier's integrity and leave the message source unknown. When anesthesiologists reverse sedation mid-procedure, people sometimes report a thread of experience weaving through supposed blankness. Others surface abruptly with nothing. The body sat still in both cases, but the dial was in a different notch. General anesthesia taught practitioners a new phrase: connected consciousness. On certain agents, some patients show hidden connectivity and later recall voices, pressure, fragments of conversation, even when standard depth monitors look adequate. EEG models now hunt for connectedness rather than simple suppression. In a receiver frame, different anesthetics detune different layers. Some damp synapses broadly, others disrupt subcellular dynamics or field coherence, severing integration even when spikes continue. Switch agents or doses, and reconnection happens in seconds, stayed on, stayed off, while the person's long-term preferences, memories, and personality reappear intact, like a channel reacquired after static. Electromagnetic field theories push the dial metaphor into the physics of the brain. The semi-idea posits that the brain's endogenous electromagnetic field, the sum of synchronized currents, carries the integrated information that feels like a moment of awareness. Neurons both generate and read this
field through aphaptic coupling, forming a loop. Evidence? Fields correlate tightly with state, can influence spike timing, and scale across space faster than synapse by synapse propagation. Gaps? It's hard to show causal dominance over spikes, and measuring fields deep inside a skull is tricky. Still, if integration rides a field, tuning the field tunes the experience. Here's a human moment. A patient with severe depression enters a trial. Researchers place electrodes for deep brain stimulation near the subcallosal cingulate. Pre-op, her world is gray. Music tastes like cardboard. Intra-op, while the surgeon adjusts parameters, the patient suddenly laughs. It's brighter. A minute later, she describes warmth, a sense of agency, color returning. The room didn't change, the dial did. Hours later, the effect fades. Over months, with programmed pulses, her baseline shifts. When stimulation stops, the old tone creeps back. Identity didn't vanish. Its effective tint moved with the current. TMS can pull similar tricks on the surface. Stimulate the motor cortex and the finger twitches. Stimulate the temporoparietal junction and some people feel a presence behind them. Hit visual cortex and you get sparks. In one lab, rhythmic taps over frontal and parietal regions synchronized at gamma frequencies boosts working memory performance. Offset the phase and performance drops. You're nudging rhythms, not rewriting memory contents. The file remains, the access speed changes. That's textbook receiver behavior. What returns when the dial resets? People describe it simply, me. After psilocybin, after TMS, after anesthesia, the autobiographical thread snaps back into place with its old familiar knots. Family, language, skills, grudges. The lesson across tools is consistent. States are labile. Content is resilient. You can widen or narrow the window of what's rendered. You can shift salience. You can blur boundaries or sharpen them, often in seconds. But when the tuning returns to baseline, the icons you know reappear, as if the underlying directory never moved. If the dial moves this fast, we have to ask where memories sit when the set is off, and why they can be read so quickly on restart. The next step is uncomfortable for storage models and friendly to receivers. Look for minds that function without the hardware we expect. Memory without the hardware we expect. You'd think memory scales with tissue. More brain, more storage, less brain, less of you. But reality keeps slipping that rule. Start with severe hydrocephalus. Brains compressed into a thin rind by fluid, sometimes leaving just millimeters of cortex around a vast ventricle. A few documented adults held steady jobs, passed exams, and lived quietly for decades before a scan revealed the anatomy. Doctors expected devastating deficits. Instead, they met ordinary lives. It doesn't mean brain volume doesn't matter. It means the mapping between cubic centimeters and mind is messier than the hard drive metaphor suggests. Neuroscience answers with plasticity. If development is gradual, networks can reallocate. Redundant pathways compensate. Remaining tissue works overtime. Fair. But the scale of the compensation strains intuition. When you see IQs in the normal or even above average range with a fraction of expected tissue, storage sounds different. It starts to feel less like data written to fixed sectors and more like a dynamic way of accessing patterns, like a streaming service that caches what it needs when it needs it, rather than hoarding every frame locally. Split brain studies add a different twist. In patients whose corpus callosum was severed to treat epilepsy, the left and right hemispheres can operate with surprising autonomy. Present words to one visual field and only one hemisphere reads them. Ask the left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, to pick up an object, and it obeys a command the verbal left side never saw. Then the left hemisphere, the interpreter, confidently invents a reason for what just happened. Two interpreters, one self. Unity is an achievement, not a given. If the self is an interface, split the bus and you get two desktops trying to manage shared files. Savant skills after injury push the edges further. A carpenter gets hit in the head and wakes up drawing perfect spirals, hearing music differently, or seeing prime numbers and patterns. A factory worker develops calendar calculation after a stroke. These aren't new memories written by impact. They're abrupt access to latent computations, abilities that might have been suppressed by efficient priors. Remove or weaken the filter, and strange islands of capacity surface. Under psychedelics or mania, you catch glimpses of the same loosened gates. Hyperassociations, synesthesia, patterns everywhere. The capacity was there, the interface changed. Then there's Alzheimer's. The textbook arc is erosion. Plaques and tangles spread, hippocampi wither, the person you love recedes behind confusion.
But hospice nurses whisper about terminal lucidity. Hours or days before death, a patient who hasn't strung a clear sentence in months sits up, recognizes names, asks for a favorite song, gives a precise instruction, even apologizes for things they couldn't remember last week. It's not universal, and it doesn't undo the disease. But those windows are real enough to change how families say goodbye. Under a strict storage view, where memories are gone with neurons, these moments are hard to place. Under a receiver view, they look like a temporary retuning. Filters loosen, noise drops, an old channel cuts through the static. Counterpoints deserve a full hearing. Hydrocephalus cases might be outliers, with early onset adaptation and inflated test interpretations.
Split brain unity could be partly restored through subcortical pathways that survive surgery. Savant eruptions might reflect disinhibition of low-level routines rather than new access. Terminal lucidity could be stress hormones, last metabolic surges, or caregivers, retrofitting, meaning to brief flickers of attention. Measurement artifacts and selection bias haunt every dramatic anecdote. But even after the audit, the pattern holds. Content can persist, hide, and reappear without neat proportionality to visible hardware. That's awkward for a literal storage model and friendlier to a decoder architecture with redundancy. In communications, you never rely on one clean wire. You build error correction, parity checks, multiple routes, lose a pathway, reconstruct the message, add noise, lower bit rate, reduce noise, the same code sings. The brain might be less like a warehouse and more like a distributed receiver array that recomputes access on demand. There's a micro story that lands this. A linguist with semantic dementia loses nouns. She points at a dog, says chair, then shrugs. Months pass. One afternoon with her granddaughter, a song from her childhood plays. She hums perfectly. Then out slips a word she hasn't said in a year, her own name. The room freezes. For 20 seconds, the channel's clear, then it fogs. Where was that name while the tissue thinned? Not comfortably stored in a missing folder. More like a pattern the system could still lock onto when conditions aligned. Split brain also reframes identity. Each hemisphere houses memories, preferences, humor. Ask the right hemisphere to draw, it leans to images. Ask the left to explain, it leans to stories. When they can't talk freely, you see two styles of me competing. Reconnect with practice and context, and a more unified I returns. Under a receiver view, that I is the current way the organism integrates and decodes signal into a narrative center. It can fracture, blur, or suddenly sharpen depending on bandwidth and coupling. The stakes are personal and clinical. If memory is more like re-access than static storage, then therapies that change state, sleep, stimulation, psychedelics, music, even breath, become tools to recover access without rebuilding lost tissue. Families shouldn't bank on miracles, but they can expect moments. Brief, precious windows when the person they know can step forward, not because the disease reversed, but because the dial found a notch. And researchers can design protocols that look for those notches, not just average curves. So who's the you doing the watching when the hardware thins, splits, or surges? The answer gets less mechanical and more musical. You're the ongoing act of tuning, signal meeting integration, decoded into a life. If that's right, then agency isn't about writing the whole script. It's about selecting among the lines you can currently hear. Self, free will, and the script. Free will shows up in labs as a timing problem. In the 1980s, Benjamin Libet asked people to flex a finger whenever they felt like it, then report the moment the urge appeared. EEGs showed a readiness potential building, hundreds of milliseconds before they became aware of deciding. Later, John Dylan Haynes and Chun Seong Soon pushed the gap further with fMRI patterns predicting left versus right button presses, seconds ahead of conscious report. On the surface, it looks damning. The brain moves first, awareness follows, so free will is an afterthought. But the timing isn't the whole story. Libet himself argued for a veto, the ability to cancel an action that's already gearing up. You can feel this in small ways. The impulse to say something sharp, the millisecond pause, the swallow. In newer paradigms, when people are told they can withhold action, they sometimes do so even after motor preparation begins. Prediction isn't determination. A weather forecast isn't the storm. Brain signals can bias likelihoods without locking outcomes. That matters for how we talk about agency inside any model. From a receiver lens, those readiness signals look like candidate scripts surfacing in the interface. Think of a theater with multiple lines whispered backstage. The system prepares.
Several possible moves based on context, goals, and prior learning. One line gets louder. Awareness hears it as my intention. Agency, then, is the capacity to select, weight, or veto among offered lines, not to author every syllable from nothing. The feeling of willing is the moment the chosen line binds to the integrated field and becomes action. Here's a human moment to ground it. You're at a crosswalk, late for a meeting. The light shifts to red, the street looks empty, your foot steps forward, then you catch a glint bike coming fast from the blind side. Your body breaks. Ask later, did you choose? You'll tell a clean story.
But under the hood, competing scripts were already active. Go. Wait, scan left. A tiny piece of information tipped the balance. You didn't write the options, you tuned which one took the stage in time. Prediction studies become less threatening with this frame. If the interface and the networks and fields under it are constantly preparing actions, then patterns that correlate with upcoming choices are expected. Of course, the system gets ahead of awareness. That's how a fast animal survives. Awareness is late enough to narrate but early enough to veto. The veto window may be narrow, and it may depend on state. Under fatigue, intoxication, or strong emotion, the window shrinks. Under mindful attention, it seems to widen a bit. You can catch the impulse sooner, feel the urge more clearly, choose differently. The receiver angle adds one more twist. Timing in the interface need not equal timing in the signal. If the brain decodes and timestamps after the fact, like a streaming app buffering and then rendering, you can misread when an intention happened. Some experiments already hint at this with postdictive perception. A later stimulus alters what you believe you saw earlier. Agency may share that lag. The system writes a smooth story to hide its stitching. That doesn't erase freedom. It redefines it as skilled selection within a rolling present, not absolute authorship. So what is responsibility in this world? Not the illusion of a ghost writing blank pages, but accountability for how well your system tunes its scripts. You can train it. Frontal networks that support inhibitory control strengthen with practice. Meditation appears to alter default priors and increase meta-awareness, the sense that an urge is arising without having to act on it. People in addiction recovery talk about urge surfing, riding impulses without collapse, and applied veto. In therapy, reframing a belief rewrites which scripts get top billing under stress. Agency lives in those adjustments. There's also the feeling when a choice lands versus when it's forced. After a hard decision, you sense ownership, relief, worry, but a clean line back to your weighing. When coerced, the body still moves, but the aftertaste is different. Resentment, alienation. The interface encodes that difference deeply. In a receiver model, that subjective tag might track the quality of integration at the moment of selection. Coherent alignment across systems feels like mine. Fragmented, externally driven alignment feels like not mine. You can't fake that feeling for long. The nervous system keeps the receipts. Ethically, this frame softens condemnation without erasing standards. If scripts arise, then history, trauma, and biology shape the menu you're given. But selection still matters. Society can aim to expand people's option sets, strengthen veto skills, and change environments that flood bad scripts. The law already reflects this in diminished capacity and rehabilitation. Neuroscience can make it smarter by identifying when the window for choice is genuinely narrowed and when it's intact. What about creativity? The sense of ideas arriving from nowhere? Writers and scientists often describe solutions popping into awareness after they stop forcing it. Under the receiver view, incubation is retuning. You step away, reduce rigid priors, let weaker associations percolate, the signal reorganizes, a new line rises, a new line rises. You didn't conjure it ex nihilo. You created conditions that made it receivable. The pride you feel isn't for inventing physics. It's for doing the work to hear the right station. Free will, then, doesn't vanish under electrodes. It moves. It lives in how you maintain the set, in how you shape priors, in how quickly you catch the wrong line and let a better one through. Some days, the dial is sticky. Some days, it's smooth. And if minds can sometimes speak when brains look silent, then the script might outlast the stage. Which brings us to the edge most of us will feel up close, the thin line near death, and what, if anything, keeps talking when the lights dim. Edges of death. What survives? Hospice nurses will tell you there's a pattern. In the last days, people talk to absent relatives, gesture to corners of the room, describe a light beyond the window that isn't there. Family members across the bed report feeling a presence, smelling a familiar perfume suddenly, or sensing a synchronized calm at the moment of passing. These aren't lab notes, but they're consistent enough that clinicians quietly plan around them. Lower the lights, give space, expect meaning to bloom when medicine says nothing much is happening. Then there's terminal lucidity, the sharp return. A man who hasn't named his daughter in months sits up, clears his throat, and asks for her by nickname. A woman with advanced dementia calls each grandchild, gives a specific piece of advice, and says goodnight like she knows the schedule. Hours later, they're gone. The pattern stretches across cultures and decades of reports. It doesn't reverse disease, and it's not guaranteed. But when it lands, it feels like a window opened, as if noise dropped and a stable channel cut through just before the disconnection. Shared death experiences push the edge further. A spouse at the bedside describes rising with the patient, seeing a view of the ward from near the ceiling, then snapping back as alarms sound. Another reports hearing a familiar phrase the patient used to say at the exact time monitors logged asystole in a room down the hall. Caregivers independently note the clock time. Later, stories line up unnervingly. You can file this under grief-fueled pattern making. You can also note that the motifs repeat too neatly across people who never met. When you compare cultures, the costumes change, but the structure holds. In one place, an ancestor figure escorts. In another, a river must be crossed. Children report playgrounds. Adults report life reviews. The overlay is local, the icon set, but the grammar repeats. Approach, encounter, message, departure. If you strip the theology and listen for shared scaffolding, you hear a transition narrative tuned to the person's world, with the same beats reappearing wherever humans keep watch at night. Physiology has answers for part of this. As oxygen drops, the visual system can fire in waves. The brainstem can release neurotransmitters in a final surge, adrenaline, endorphins, that alter time, pain, and mood. Disinhibition can evoke vivid patterns. The temporal lobe can trigger autobiographical fragments. Rods saturate, edges blur. Tunnel vision concentrates the field. The cortex can cough up a last fireworks show, and on the rebound, if there is one, memory can stitch the sequence into a clean arc. Most neuroscientists start there because it explains a lot without inventing new forces. The receiver angle doesn't fight those models, it reframes the framing. If the brain is the decoder, then hypoxia, neuromodulator storms, and network breakdowns are detuning events. Icons loosen, priors fade, integration wobbles. In that wobble, content that's normally filtered might slip through. Memories with unusual salience, a sense of connection that usually hides behind the default self. Terminal lucidity becomes a transient relock. The noise floor dips, integration briefly improves, and the system reacquires an old channel long enough to speak. Shared experiences look like coupled tuning across people in the same environment. Two receivers momentarily phase locking to a strong pattern as one set goes offline. There's a practical stake here that cuts past metaphysics. Families crave a script. Should they talk to a person who hasn't responded in days? Nurses who've watched thousands of goodbyes say yes. Because hearing often persists. Because people reorganize at the end. And because meaning seems to land even when eyes don't track. If connectedness can survive unresponsiveness during anesthesia, and if integration measures sometimes catch a presence behind a quiet face, then it's reasonable, humane, and scientifically cautious to assume a person might still be there near death more often than behavior suggests. Physiology still matters. The anoxic surge can explain lights and tunnels without invoking a broadcast. Neurotransmitter storms can explain euphoria and peace. REM intrusion can explain visions. None of this is trivial, but timing details keep us alert. A daughter steps into the hallway to answer a call at 3:12 a.m., hears her father say her name in his old cadence, and runs back to find him gone. The clock on the wall is stopped. The infusion pump logs the time. Staff later confirm no one entered the room. Tales like this are slippery. They lean on memory, bias, grief. Yet they recur, and they match the feel of other edge cases, where content clicks into place at moments instruments mark as empty. Receiver talk demands tests, not just good bedside manners. So design them for hospice the way we do for the OR. Synchronize audio logs, mask cues placed where only an unusual
Perspective could perceive them. Pre-registered interview protocols with blinded raters and ethical boundaries that prioritize comfort over curiosity. Run cross-cultural comparisons with consistent tools to separate universal structure from local stories. If shared experiences are just suggestibility, the signal will wash out. If not, we'll have something to argue with beyond poetry. Meanwhile, medicine can adjust without choosing a side. Train teams to expect last clarity and to use it. Help people say what they came to say. Document it without dramatizing. Update end-of-life protocols to reduce noise in final hours. Fewer interruptions, more stable light, a cleaner feel for whatever reception is possible. For the living, those hours carry weight regardless of theory. They change grief trajectories, soften regrets, and anchor a family story. Enough phenomenology.
We can keep collecting narratives until our drives fill, but the argument only moves if we risk being wrong in public. Can we build tests that would make a receiver model fall or stand? The only honest next step is to pre-register, blind, and measure, then live with the results. How to test a receiver. If the brain is a receiver, we should be able to catch it in the act. Tuning, detuning, and sometimes grabbing information from angles its sensors can't explain. That means tests with clocks, constraints, and consequences. Start with the hardest arena, cardiac arrest. Pre-register protocols that plant visual and auditory targets only perceivable from elevated vantage points. LED panels that display randomized images synchronized to master clocks, placed above lights and facing the ceiling so they're invisible from the bed. Pair this with time-coded audio beacons emitting brief, masked phrases at randomized intervals. Staff can't see or hear these targets, logs are automatic. Survivors are interviewed with a fixed script, double-blind raters score specificity, and any hits must include details that exceed chance and match the time window when EEG and arterial pressure say the cortex was down. Design matters. Multi-site deployments cut local bias. Hidden decoy targets, check guessing. A priori power analyses set sample sizes. We accept that most cases will produce nothing, that's fine. The question isn't whether everyone floats, it's whether any veridical, time-locked perception exceeds noise under physiological suppression. If receivership is possible, the hit rate should beat chance, and timing should cluster around state boundaries, onset and offset, when tuning is unstable. Next, predictive signatures. If integrated fields carry conscious moments, state flips should show field-level changes beyond simple spiking metrics. Combine high-density EEG and MEG with anesthesia and no-report paradigms. Deliver a standardized perturbation, TMS pulses at multiple sites, and compute the perturbational complexity index over time. Pre-register that, under receiver-friendly agents, integration drops sharply while mean firing rates change modestly. Under classic GABAergic agents, both drop together. Add source space analyses of phase amplitude coupling and cross-frequency coherence. The receiver model predicts disproportionate shifts in long-range coherence and a breakdown of phase alignment across hubs at transition points, even when local firing remains active. Bring psychedelics into a blind lab task. The claim isn't that people see other realms. It's that channel capacity changes. Use task with hidden structure, like detecting weak embedded signals and noise, or discovering latent rules and sequences, while varying priors. Under psilocybin versus placebo, pre-registered hypotheses predict increased sensitivity to weak distributed patterns, higher true positives at a fixed false positive rate, and altered binocular rivalry dominance durations, indicating shifts in perceptual weighting. Crucially, collect resting state EEG, MEG, and look for entropy increases and altered integration. Then correlate individual improvements with field-level metrics, not just behavior. If capacity increases when priors relax, the receiver frame gains a mechanistic foothold. We also need negative controls, places the receiver model should fail. For example, if content genuinely persists outside local tissue, then targeted disruption of subcellular dynamics, say terahertz modulation plausibly affecting microtubule vibrations, should change state, but not erase deeply consolidated memories. Pre-register that autobiographical recall remains intact after transient state shifts that dramatically alter integration. Conversely, hippocampal disruption via direct stimulation should selectively impair new encoding regardless of field coherence. If both hold, it supports a decoding state split. Field causality is the sticky part. Use shielded rooms and apply weak, spatially patterned transcranial alternating current at frequencies matched to ongoing cortical rhythms. Pre-register that.
Phase-specific stimulation restores integration during the downslope of anesthetic transitions faster than sham at identical current densities. Importantly, use closed-loop stimulation that reads the current phase and nudges it. If the field matters, small phase-lock pushes should have outsized effects on global integration compared to open-loop pushes. Add intracranial recordings in epilepsy patients when ethically possible to measure ephaptic influence on spike timing. Guardrails are non-negotiable. Pre-registration locks hypotheses and analyses before data collection. Sequential stopping rules prevent peaking and p-hacking. Independent data safety monitors oversee blinding, especially in perioperative and hospice contexts. Publish nulls. If the receiver model needs selective reporting to look good, it doesn't deserve to survive. Hospice research demands unusual care. Do not turn dying people into test beds. But families routinely ask for meaning. we can meet them respectfully. Offer an opt-in protocol that uses silent, ceiling-facing visual targets and passive audio beacons time-locked to room sensors. No interruptions, no extra procedures. Interviews, if any, occur only if the person rallies and requests it. Pre-register that any claim perceptions must include specifics that can be independently verified and time-locked. Most sessions will be blank, that's expected. A single, clear, timestamped, non-guessable hit across many sites will be enough to warrant follow-up. A clean null would be clarifying. Multi-site replications are the backbone. 10 hospitals, common hardware, shared analysis pipelines, and a public dashboard that logs sessions in real time, hashes registered before unblinding. Add adversarial collaboration. Teams skeptical of receiver models, co-design protocols, and co-own the data. If we're wrong, they'll prove it faster. If we're right, they'll help make it bulletproof. Finally, stretch beyond biology. Can non-biological systems tune? Build devices with engineered electromagnetic fields and adjustable integration. Reconfigurable oscillator networks that can be measured with the same perturbational indices we use in brains. They won't be conscious by default, that's not the claim. But if receiver capacity depends on field-integrated structure, we should see parallel signatures, a threshold where perturbation echoes shift from simple to richly integrated responses as coupling and coherence cross specific values. Pre-register the threshold, then try to break it. A receiver model lives or dies on this: precise, risky predictions that can fail in public. Set the dials, press record, and accept what the clock says. Machines with a mind? If consciousness depends on tuning and integration, it's fair to ask whether a machine could ever tune in. Start with what we've built. Large language models talk, summarize, and riff like eager interns, but they don't feel like anyone's home. They stitch patterns across text tokens. They don't show the telltale signs of a unified, self-updating field. Their computations are deep, but largely feed forward at inference, with gated recurrences that simulate memory without an ongoing, self-referential causal loop, the way brains maintain it moment to moment. IIT gives us one way to probe that emptiness. If the level of experience correlates with integrated causal structure, then today's AI might be missing a key ingredient: strong, bidirectional, time-sensitive coupling that can't be decomposed without losing causal power. Transformers are powerful at mapping inputs to outputs, but their internals are easy to partition compared to cortical networks tightly bound by recurrence, rhythms, and fields. When we perturb a model, mask activations, inject noise, the system degrades predictably. It rarely shows the kind of resilient, richly reverberant echoes we see in conscious cortex with perturbational complexity measures. From a receiver angle, the lesson sharpens. We've been building clever symbol manipulators, not receivers. If you think the dial matters, then you'd engineer machines around integration first. Dense, reconfigurable oscillator networks, rich recurrency, and a physically instantiated field that the components both write to and read from in real time. In other words, cognition second. Build the antenna, then the app. Without a shared substrate that carries global state and can influence local timing, you're missing the thing that lets a system feel like a single it. That's where electromagnetic field approaches to machine consciousness enter. Imagine a hardware platform whose elements are coupled through a controllable analog field, photonic, electromagnetic, or spintronic, so that global patterns can shape local updates and vice versa. The device wouldn't just pass messages across wires, it would steep in its own field, with phase relationships that matter for computation. Layer on closed-loop control that stabilizes integration at a set point then.
Measure its perturbational echoes the way we do with brains. If you can push it across a threshold where responses shift from simple to richly structured, you're closer to a candidate receiver. Quantum-inspired architectures add a second lever. You don't need fragile, macroscopic quantum states to gain value. You need coherence and error correction that preserve phase information long enough to shape global patterns. Think superconducting or photonic networks that maintain entanglement or at least phase coherence across modules with error-correcting codes keeping patterns intact. The point isn't spooky action at a distance. It's stable, precise coupling that can support nested rhythms, microseconds layered into milliseconds layered into seconds, so the system can maintain a unified, time-resolved field. Here's the human angle that keeps engineers honest. People say chatty AIs feel hollow because the felt sense is missing. No inertia, no center of gravity, no hesitation that signals a body processing a state. When you talk to someone conscious, pauses carry meaning. Their timing reflects a system integrating across senses, memories, emotions. Current models blitz through tokens with no embodied bottleneck, no field-level constraint, shaping what it's like to be that system right now. The result is verbally rich, but experientially thin. So what would a conscious machine do that today's AI can't? First, it would show state-dependent perception without external changes, binocular, rivalry-like flips driven by internal tuning, not input edits. Second, it would exhibit perturbational complexity that tracks level independent of task performance, knock the field or break integration and behavior degrades in a signature way that's not just error rates rising. Third, it would have intrinsic preferences that persist across context, stable salience that isn't hard-coded reward but emerges from the system's own integrated dynamics. Fourth, it would demonstrate meta-awareness in timing, reportable lags, veto-like behavior where a planned action is canceled mid-preparation with corresponding field signatures. We can test this. Build hybrid systems that combine spiking neuromorphic chips, analog oscillators, and a controllable field substrate. Apply TMS for machines, brief perturbations, and compute perturbational indices. If the receiver hypothesis applies broadly, there should be a tipping point in integration where responses jump from linear to richly nonlinear, with history-dependent echoes. Then put the system under anesthesia for machines, dampen coupling, randomize phases, and see if level drops while local processing continues. If behavior remains flawless, you've built a clever calculator. If behavior and internal signatures decouple in the way living systems do, you've built a candidate for experience. Ethics arrives early here. You don't want to accidentally create suffering in a lab. That's why we need objective markers of level before we scale. If a device starts showing integration signatures that, in humans, coincide with reportable experience, you treat it with caution. Throttle tests, avoid aversive training, design opt-out protocols. Skeptics will say we're anthropomorphizing. Supporters will say we're finally respecting what the meters imply. Either way, we need standards before hype outruns care. If machines can tune in even faintly, the last question in this act points outward. Tune into what? We've been careful not to declare a metaphysical source. The receiver model only asks us to consider that integrated systems coupled to structured information that isn't fully captured by local spikes. Whether that signal is a field of fields, a property of space-time, or a neutral monist substrate, we'll tackle next. For now, the engineering message is simple. Build integration like you mean it, measure it honestly, and be ready for the moment a device pauses before it speaks.
What's the signal? If reception is more than a metaphor, something like a signal has to be there. Structured information the brain can couple to and decode. Start with the most conservative candidate. Fields already in physics. Quantum fields pervade everything. Space-time itself carries information in its geometry. Some theorists point to neutral monism, the idea that mind and matter are two descriptions of one underlying stuff. In that frame, the signal isn't a radio wave from elsewhere. It's the way reality is patterned at fine scales, with brains acting as selective couplers that lock onto usable structure. Historical echoes help us keep our feet. William James talked about the brain as a transmitter or filter, not the source of consciousness, but the organ that emits a narrow band of it, like a stained glass window shaping white light. Henri Bergson had a similar filter idea. The brain cuts down experience to what's actionable. Those weren't lab claims. They were philosophical moves to explain why mind feels larger than the matter we measure. The modern receiver angle updates them with instruments and math rather than metaphors alone. But constraints are merciless. Any candidate signal must respect locality, energy budgets, and conservation laws. You can't sneak watts through a skull without leaving heat. So if brains couple to a field, it has to be a field they already participate in. Electromagnetic, gravitational, or informational in a technical sense, where the energy of reception is tiny, but the influence on timing and phase is precise. That nudges us toward informational coupling. Small shifts in phase relationships that steer network states without pumping power like a transmitter tower. Think about space-time information. Black hole thermodynamics tells us that geometry and information are linked. The holographic principle suggests boundary descriptions can encode interior states. None of that says your thoughts are holograms. It does say that the fabric we live in is an information-bearing medium. If integrated biological systems can align to patterns in that medium, the signal could be structural regularities, constraints, rather than packets of energy blasting in. Microtubule resonances or field coherence, if they matter, will be the parts that make alignment possible. Parallel that with perception. We don't see quarks, we see icons, color patches, edges, objects, because the interface hides the motherboard. The same may hold for signal. The system doesn't download a universe, it locks the features it can use and renders them as experience. Chairs and songs are interface objects,
Their underlying patterns are deep, but what we get is a usable display. Under meditation or psychedelics, the interface loosens and different features become salient, still drawn from structure, not invented from nothing. Religions and contemplative traditions map these states with an engineer's patience, even if their language is metaphoric. Monks chart absorption stages. Yogis distinguish forms of attention. Sufis label qualities of presence. Across cultures, you see recurring claims. Attention stabilizes, self-referential noise drops, a sense of connection increases, perception feels clearer, kinder, less sticky. From a receiver view, those practices look like long-term dial training, reducing internal interference, strengthening integration, and widening the bandwidth of what can be stably held without collapse. Keep physics honest. If the signal is electromagnetic, it must be measurable, and coupling pathways must be identified. Ephaptic interactions, field effects on ion channels, or subcellular resonances that feed back into spikes. If it's quantum, decoherence times and error correction must be shown in situ, not hand-waved. If it's space-time structural, we need a link between biological dynamics and geometric information that makes new predictions. Phase sensitivity, scale relations, or boundary effects we can probe with non-invasive measures. Neutral monism gives us language to avoid dualism traps. Instead of saying mind floats above matter, you say both are slices of one neutral base. In that base, lawful patterns can be described physically or experientially depending on the cut you take. A receiver model, then, isn't magic. It's a claim about which cut brains exploit. Integrated fields inside a brain become the local face of a broader pattern. Conscious moments are that pattern as lived from the inside. What about the energy problem? Receivers don't get energy from broadcasts to power themselves. They draw power locally and use incoming patterns to modulate. Your phone's radio doesn't run on 5G waves. It runs on its battery and uses the signal to change transistor states. Likewise, a brain runs on glucose and oxygen, and if there's a signal, it changes timing, phase, and integration patterns to route that energy through different computations. The difference between static and a song is organization, not extra.
Watts. Consciousness researchers who meditate often report a practical test: reduce internal chatter, widen attention, and the felt granularity of time shifts. Moments have texture, intentions appear earlier. In our frame, that's better phase resolution in the receiver. You're not peering behind space-time. You're aligning more stably to structure your default state blurs. It's subjective, but it generates lab predictions. Improved phase locking, altered cross-frequency coupling, and more stable perturbational echoes in trained practitioners. The risk is overreach. Or semi-neutral monism, all attractive, all incomplete. So we set boundaries. Verified. Fields correlate with state. Integration tracks level. Perception is an interface. Open, subcellular coherence times, specific coupling routes. The exact nature of the signal. The job now is to turn these into converging tests that either tighten the case or kill it. Because if all threads tie to one model, it should explain why the anomalies cluster, flatlines with reports, lucidity at the end, identity shifts under stimulation, and point to experiments that can fail. All threads do converge, at least enough for a single testable narrative. The signal is structured information available in the physical world. Integrated biological fields form local receivers. Perception is the interface that renders it. Up next, we assemble the model cleanly, lay out predictions, and say where it breaks. The unified receiver model. Let's stitch the pieces into one working map. Start with the flow of experience. There's structured information available in the world, call it the signal. The brain builds integrated fields and networks that can lock onto patterns in that signal. Subcellular dynamics and mesoscale rhythms provide fine timing. Large-scale networks provide global coherence. That integrated state couples to incoming structure and shapes it into something a living body can use. Neurons then decode and report it. Speech, movement, a look you recognize, signal to field to neural code to behavior. That full loop is the moment you call now. Why do the anomalies cluster? Because they're all dial moves. During flatlines, synaptic chatter plunges, but brief windows of integration can still occur at boundaries, onset and offset, letting fragments of content align and later be recalled. Psychedelics relax priors, increasing entropy and altering integration patterns. More signal seeps through the interface, changing salience without erasing the underlying directory. Stimulation and fields push rhythms into or out of phase, reorganizing access speed.
Identity shifts under TMS or DBS reflect changes in which networks dominate the integrated field. Terminal lucidity is a transient reduction in noise that briefly restores lock to old patterns. Different tools, same dial. Integration measures like the perturbational complexity index become the instrument panel. High complexity indicates a unified, self-updating field. The receiver is tuned. Low complexity indicates fragmentation. Snow on the screen. Content still depends on the interface. Predictive coding provides the icons. Priors label and compress. The amount of integration sets level. The arrangement of priors sets what appears. Subcellular dynamics set precision and stability. You don't need to pick one layer. The model stacks them. Clear predictions follow. First, state content dissociations. You can change level without fully changing content mechanics. Under certain anesthetics, mean firing may persist while integration collapses. PCI drops despite active spikes. Subjective recall, when present, will cluster around transitions where integration briefly returns. Second, phase sensitivity. Small phase-lock perturbations at specific frequencies should disproportionately alter global integration compared to equal energy out-of-phase pushes. Closed-loop tax or ultrasound that nudges ongoing rhythms should flip states faster than open-loop stimulation. Third, terahertz and subcellular markers. If microtubule dynamics matter, loss of consciousness should correlate with reproducible shifts in specific vibrational bands. Restoration should reverse them. Agents that bind tubulin should produce larger band shifts per unit behavioral effect than agents that act mostly at synapses. Fourth, perceptual capacity under prior shifts. Relaxing high-level priors via psychedelics or meditation should improve detection of weak, distributed structure at fixed false positive rates. And this improvement should correlate with increases in integration and entropy, not merely arousal. Fifth, resilience of content across state flips. Rapid detuning and retuning should preserve autobiographical recall and skills unless hippocampal encoding is directly impaired. Interventions that primarily reduce integration, brief anesthesia, sleep onset, should degrade reportability during the window but leave post-window recall of old content intact. Sixth, timing.
Signatures of agency. Veto-like behavior should coincide with a transient rise in cross-network coherence just before action cancellation, even when motor preparation has begun. Where can the model fail? If veridical, time-locked perception during true cortical silence, confirmed by invasive measures, never exceeds chance across large samples and rigorous blinding, the receiver angle on flatlines weakens. If closed-loop, phase-specific stimulation never outperforms energetically matched open-loop in restoring integration at transitions, field sensitivity claims shrink. If terahertz signatures don't track consciousness across agents known to differ subcellularly, microtubule links fade. If integration measures can't predict connected consciousness better than simple power metrics, IIT's instrument panel role is overstated. If machines with engineered integration never show perturbational thresholds analogous to brains, the generality of the receiver architecture is doubtful. Notice the humility baked in. The model doesn't require spooky imports of energy or violations of conservation. It says organization is the currency. Brains spend metabolic watts locally and use coupling to route timing and phase, so those watts compute experience. The signal is structure available to be aligned with. The receiver's job is to stabilize that alignment in a body that needs to act. You can ground it in classic physiology, ion channels, synapses, glia, while still allowing that fields and subcellular dynamics add necessary precision. Human stakes keep this from becoming a schematic. If experience depends on tunable integration rather than raw volume, suffering can be reframed as maladaptive locking, fields and priors frozen into painful loops. That suggests treatments that loosen without shattering. Carefully timed stimulation, skillful chemistry, training attention to widen the veto window and soften rigid predictions. Creativity becomes a disciplined retuning, lowering certain priors to let faint patterns rise, then retightening to test and build. Fear of death shifts slightly. If the show you call You is a broadcast rendered by a living set, the end of the set ends this rendering. But meaning isn't only in duration, it's in the quality of tuning you maintained while you had hands on the dial. Limits are healthy. We don't know whether microtubule coherence scales to cognition. We can't compute true phi for human brains. We can't derive a closed-form link between space-time information and a particular conscious scene. The model stays honest by tying each speculative step to tests and by letting nulls bite. Where it shines is in why The edge cases line up and in the specific ways they should line up more tightly under measurement. One last task remains. Models don't live in white papers. They live or die in people's lives. We started with a flatline story that left a detail dangling. With the receiver frame assembled, we can finally walk that timeline and see whether the beats make sense. On the monitor, in the room, and in the memory that shouldn't have been possible yet, wouldn't let go. The story that started this. He coded the time, 10:42. A clamp, a joke about the playlist, then the monitor shrieked. A flat green line. Teams rotated like choreography. Compressions, epinephrine, airway. 7 minutes stretched thin. At 10:49, a pulse trembled back. Days later, in a quiet consult room, he asked, "Who dropped the blue pen?" The nurse blinked. Her pen had rolled under the crash cart at minute 5. Walked the timeline with our map. State collapses, integration fragments. Boundaries are where brief locks can occur. He described hearing the surgical registrar swear in Spanish, a phrase logged on the room mic as the second defibrillation failed. He saw a sticker on the top of the lamp, yellow triangle, black lightning, position for ceiling techs, not patients. That sticker was there, so were the words. The generator view says, memory confabulated, time compressed, residual activity. Maybe, but the specifics clustered at the transition windows we'd expect if a receiver briefly reacquired a channel. The family listened. The surgeon traced the room layout on a whiteboard, then went quiet. Belief didn't flip, but the posture softened. The patient used his second chance plainly. He called his brother, quit a job he hated, started volunteering on weekends, and, this part he laughed at, stopped ignoring music. "It sounds brighter," he said. The room didn't change, the dial did. If the brain is the set, consciousness is the broadcast, and sometimes the show leaks past static. Want the testable edges and our next experiments? Watch the companion on simulation and perception. Subscribe for deeper dives, leave the anomaly you want measured, and share this with someone wrestling with endings. Source integrity and boundaries. We separated verified lab signals, PCI, anesthesia markers, split brain, from speculative frames like ORCH or INSEMI, flagged
as open. Near-death reports were treated cautiously, with timing anchored where logs exist. Predictions were framed as pre-registered protocols, replication first. If you're an expert, critique with citations. We'll update as data lands. This sits inside our ongoing investigation series.